Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for our first onX Hunt deep dive. We're going to give it just a minute or two to let everybody get situated and get settled in. While we're waiting, just a couple housekeeping items. Your audio and video are turned off, so no worries if you've got noise in the background or anything like that. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A feature. That's easiest for me to go through those and answer them versus in the chat. They just get lost in the chat. Chat's better for if you just want to hop in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If you want to chat with other attendees, anything like that, that's what that is used for. We don't have anybody monitoring the Q&A while the class is going like we sometimes do. We have somebody from customer support. It's just me tonight. So Q&A we'll get to at the end of the class. I'll take all those questions and answer as many as I can towards the end. The idea with these deep dives is they're shorter classes. If you've attended previous onX Hunt Masterclasses, they tend to run an hour, hour and a half. Sometimes they go even longer than that. These are going to be much shorter. We're going to try to keep this to about a half hour or so. A little bit of that depends on the Q&A and things like that. But we're going to dive kind of deep into the app. The plan is these are going to be kind of a monthly type class where we take kind of one small aspect of the onX Hunt app and just talk about that. So tonight we're talking about underutilized layers. These are layers that we feel are vital, super important, provide very good information to onX Hunt users like yourself, but are sometimes overlooked. Some people either don't know they exist or don't quite know how to use them, what their purpose is, things like that. So we're not going to be talking about things like offline maps. We're not going to talk about base maps, waypoints, TerrainX, anything like that. We're going to try to keep this pretty much to the point on those underutilized layers. So the four kind of layers is actually 5 layers. We'll talk about that in a minute. That we're going to talk about are the slope angle, roadless areas, motorized roads and trails, and then the CWD layers. It's actually 2 layers, but they're pretty well related, so we're lumping those in together. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing this slide deck. I'm going to hop over to the onX Hunt web map. So give me one moment while I hop over there. And if you're following along on a mobile device, no worries, that's great. All this information applies there. It's just going to look a little bit different if you're on your phone or tablet, but all these layers function just the same on mobile as they do on web. If you're new to onX, this is the onX web map. You just log in at onxmaps.com, same email and password you use on your mobile device, and that's how you get in there. So I'm going to go a bit out of order from what I did on the previous slide. Decided last second to kind of change that up. But the first one we're going to jump into is the motorized roads and trails layer. So that one is found, if I go into my hunt map layers, that's up here kind of near the top left corner, open that up. And all the layers we're going to talk about today are available to you with any level of a paid membership. So you don't have to be elite to access these. If you have a premium 1-state or a premium 2-state membership, you get access to these as well. These are all nationwide layers. They're not specific to any one state, so they're applicable across a wide swath of the country. So the motorized roads and trails layer is found in the roads, trails, and rec folder here. So I'm going to open that up. You see I have it turned on currently. Nothing is showing on the map because you do have to zoom in to be able to see it. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to get to an area where there's some Forest Service. And what we're looking at are these blue and white roads and trails here. Now this layer is not turned on by default. So many times your map is going to look like this unless you turn that layer on. And there are 2 sub layers here I want to mention. There's motorized trails and there's motorized roads. Motorized trails are going to be more for OHVs. So dirt bikes, ATVs, side-by-sides, things like that. They very often have a width restriction where a lot of them will have like a 50-inch width restriction. I'm having trouble talking tonight, where it's, it's for ATVs 50 inches wide or smaller. Some of them are just dirt bike trails. Quite often they have like a gate there that you physically can't get a bigger vehicle through. So we'll get into what those look like. Motorized roads, what it sounds like: wider roads, passenger vehicle, wider side-by-sides, things like that. So why is this layer important? I've had a number of times where I've personally been out hunting with friends, with people that are well used to using onX, but they don't have their motorized roads and trails turned on. So if you don't have this turned on, it's kind of difficult to tell where those more maintained roads are. So if you're looking to drive out on a hunt, use a vehicle to access a hunt area, you can tell, if I turn that off, the roads are still there. You can still see these white lines, but it doesn't quite tell the whole story. Once I turn that back on, now you can kind of see the distinction here as well, where you have the motorized roads, which they still don't receive like highway maintenance, but they are typically more maintained than, if I zoom in here, some of these dotted lines, which are 2 tracks. In Western Montana here, these are typically old, if you call them cat roads, skid roads, logging roads. When they were doing a logging operation that might have been decades ago, they punched this road in to get the logs out, get the equipment and get the logs out. Sometimes these are still drivable by a vehicle, as long as they're not gated and all that. But there's been plenty of times where I've been on these roads walking, and there are spruce trees that are taller than I am, just because they haven't been maintained. These purple roads, much more often maintained and generally passable by a vehicle. I won't say your Honda Civic can make it up there. I drive a Suburban. A lot of these roads are plenty capable, especially if I click on the road like I just did here, and it tells me what it's accessible by. Overland, that's going to be basically a somewhat capable passenger vehicle. Again, you don't necessarily need a jacked up, a modified Jeep or a 4Runner or Tacoma or something like that. A lot of times your basic pickup truck or SUV is gonna work for some of these. High clearance 4x4, that's what we're talking about with some modifications. And then the side-by-side, your Can-Am or your Razor or something like that. The other important thing to note here are these open and close dates. You can see here, these are open May 16th and they close October 14th. So that is typically in Western Montana. They do that in the spring. A lot of times the open date is dictated on animal populations at a sensitive time of year. Think elk calving, think deer fawning, things like that, where they don't necessarily want a ton of motorized travel through there to give those animals kind of a reprieve during a vulnerable time of the year. And then in the fall, they'll typically close in conjunction with hunting seasons, whether it's they close before the start of archery season in September, or they close before the start of rifle season in October. So that's the second point I wanted to make about this. If you're using the motorized roads and trails layer, that's predominantly going to be on public lands. Most of them are on Forest Service. A lot of that is a product of the Forest Service having the best data set. We don't have the same kind of data for BLM, state, stuff like that, unfortunately. Hopefully we will in the future as more of that data gets digitized. But right now, Forest Service has this good data set. That's why we're able to show it mostly on those Forest Service administered areas. So before you go, once you have this layer turned on, double check the width restrictions, make sure your vehicle's legal on there. I'll find one here. This is an example of a motorized trail. And so that one is going to be a dirt bike only trail. Okay, so make sure you're not just looking at, oh, there's a purple line on the map. I can go on that. You see this one looks a little bit different. It's more white with kind of purple dots if you look close. Those are the trails. The roads are this more solid color. So make sure your vehicle's legal. Make sure that the time of year is correct. I have been caught on this. Shortly after I started at onX, I was going to go out bear hunting in the spring. I think it was early May. Snow had finally melted in the area. I drove out there Saturday and the gate was closed. I finally tapped on the map and realized, oh, May 16th is when that opens up. So that's the motorized roads and trails in a nutshell. More useful if you're living in an area with some Forest Service administered land. Of course, more so if you're a public type hunter. Staying in that folder, our next layer I want to talk about is the roadless areas layer. So I'm going to turn that on, and you can see immediately this kind of purplish gray shaded coloration shows up on my map. If I zoom out, you can kind of see what this looks like. And I'll get out of Montana. I'm gonna go over to Wisconsin here. So we recently updated this layer within the last year. We made it so that the roadless area, that kind of parameter, is much, I guess I should say, smaller, or we've included more areas in this. What these are showing is areas that are a half mile or more from a road. So this boundary would be, about a half mile from any road. And then of course, as you get farther into that area, you're farther from a road. So this is super useful. I remember when I first moved out to Western Montana, I grew up in the upper Midwest. It was brand new to hunting. And one thing I knew was that elk don't typically like roads, don't typically like human intrusion. So I used the roadless layer once I kind of found a unit I wanted to hunt, use the roadless layer to find those areas that were farthest from roads. And didn't kill an elk my first year, but I found elk, which was my goal. I said, first year elk hunting, man, if I can just get into elk, I'm gonna call that a win. So a couple uses for the roadless layers. Like I just said, if you're hunting an animal that tends to stray away from people, which is quite a few animals, especially big game animals, bears, elk, deer, you name it, fantastic for that. Some people also use it because they know, man, a lot of people don't like to get off the road. A lot of people don't like to get away from roads. Think grouse hunting in the upper Midwest. A lot of people like to walk logging roads. It's very effective. Very few people get off the roads very far. You can get into some untouched birds in heavily hunted areas if you're using this roadless layer to kind of try to pinpoint some of those locations. Now, this isn't a layer that I often turn on my mobile app when I'm in the field, just because it does kind of obscure your view a little bit. It used to do it a lot more. We've restyled it to make it a little more, make the terrain a little more visible in the field, while you're using it when you zoom in. I use it more as a scouting tool. Like I said, I use it predominantly for big game hunting. When I'm scouting an area, I want to get away from roads, get away from people. I can use this to do that. And I will sometimes, use this. I guess I should back up a little bit to talk about motorized roads and trails. This does not take into account those seasonal road closures I talked about. So if there's a road, like for example, I have no idea on this road. I'm gonna see if it does have a closure. Looks like it doesn't. But let's say that this road was closed during a certain time of the year. This is still, you would expect, it's basically no longer a road. You would expect the roadless area to grow. That's not the case. We leave that roadless area layer is pretty static. But something I should have mentioned when talking about the roadless or the motorized roads and trails layer was even when they're closed, you can still walk on them, right? So I'll sometimes use, let's pretend that this road does close just for this hypothetical. I would say, sweet, I can drive here and then I can hike in on this road. It's a lot easier than hiking through the bush or through the bog and get into some of these areas that are now basically roadless because there's no motorized vehicles on them. So kind of a way I use both of those layers, both when scouting and when actually hunting. Even when a road is closed, it's closed to motorized travel. Usually you can still ride a mountain bike on them. Not an electric bike, but a mountain bike. You can hike along them. It's a lot easier to do that. All right, so moving on. That is the wrong button. Moving on from the roadless areas, we are going to go up to our land and access folder. That's the next one right above it. And I'm going to turn on my slope angle layer. Now this is a layer we kind of developed. It was actually the onX Backcountry app, which is kind of our backcountry hiking and skiing app. They developed this mostly to help people find avalanche prone areas. We brought it into Hunt because it's super useful. Again, this is one I use for scouting primarily. And this one is pretty useful, especially if you're not super comfortable using topographic maps to tell slope. Again, I grew up in the upper Midwest. The places I hunted didn't have a whole lot of elevation change. I think I counted the topographic map, for the area I grew up deer hunting. And I think there's one line in like a mile and a half. So, like a 20-foot elevation change in a mile and a half. Quite a bit different out here. Took me a little bit of time to get used to reading those topographic maps. You have a key up here or a legend that shows you what the different colors mean. And this is going to show you, kind of by 5 to 8 degrees difference, what the colors mean. You go back to elk hunting. We know from studies that elk don't like to bed on super steep terrain. I can't remember the exact number. I think it's like a 20-degree grade. If it's more than 20 degrees, elk don't really bed there. They want the flattest area. Think about, yourself. You won't like sleeping on a really, steep slope either. So you can use that to find those flatter areas in a bigger area. It's real steep down in here and it gets a little flatter up on top. You can also combine this with our 3D map to really get a sense of what that looks like. So I just went into the base map there and clicked 3D. And now you can it really helps you visualize just exactly how steep we're talking here. What is, a 40 or 45 degree angle? What is 10 to 15? You can kind of zoom in and get a look at some of those areas. So you can use this for scouting. If animals kind of stick to a certain slope, if hey, I just don't want to hike super steep, I might want to hike up this ridge instead versus trying to hike up down here, even this creek bottom. I might choose to go up another way, something like that. So again, slope angle, I use it 99% of the time on web map. I use it when I'm sitting planning out a hunt, planning out a route I want to take. And you can also, one thing I forgot to mention, you can change the opacity of it. So that's how brightly it shows up on the map. You can move that up and down if you really want to kind of zoom in and see what the terrain is like in a certain area. Then I can just move this back down and back up as I need it. All right, so that's the slope angle, and we'll get into our final layers here. I am going to resituate my map, get back to 2D, and zoom out. And the final layer I want to talk about today is the CWD layers. Now again, not layers that you're going to necessarily use every day, but very useful for a couple different types of hunters. If you're a traveling hunter, first of all, CWD is moving around the country. It's gaining more prevalence. What I'm showing you here, I went into our current conditions folder and turned on the CWD positive counties layer. This is a layer we produced in conjunction with the National Deer Alliance and, the National Deer Association, or NDA. And it's showing all of the counties where there has been a CWD positive deer, moose, or elk, right? It only affects cervids. I don't believe it's been found in caribou anywhere. Hopefully it never does. Doesn't affect sheep, pronghorn, goats, bears, things like that. It's just your cervids. So you can see all around the country where those kind of hot spots are, where there have been positive tests. Now these are positive tests in both captive and wild animals, very prevalent in Wyoming, every county Montana, it's been growing in prevalence and it's been moving around. So if you are traveling to a state that has CWD, you're traveling to an area, definitely make sure you're abiding by those rules and regulations. Don't transport the material that has a higher prevalence of those prions in them. So your spinal column tissue, spleen, eyes, brain, things like that. That's why there's carcass movement restrictions in place, because that's one of the ways that CWD spreads and spreads fast is by humans driving 70 miles an hour down the interstate to a new place. They dump that material out, and those prions are then there in the environment. So we don't want this to spread any faster than it needs to. The other layer, now this is, whether you're traveling or not. Let's say you're hunting in an area. Let's say you're like, Jack, I hunt in Wisconsin and I'm not going anywhere. Wisconsin's got a pretty high prevalence of CWD in some areas. So we do have in, I believe it's 12 states. I don't have those 12 states off the top of my head, but we have sampling locations and carcass disposal locations listed on the map. So here is an example in kind of the driftless area of southwestern Wisconsin where there is a CWD sampling location. I put a waypoint here so that I could find it more easily, but that's what these look like. These little icons here tells you the name of the CWD sampling location, gives you the phone number for the person that's kind of in charge of that location, the hours, the contact. Is Doug Duran. If you're listeners to like the Meat Eater podcast or watch the show, you might recognize that name. He's done a lot of work in this area with getting these sampling locations and carcass dumpsters and things set up. So there's an example of a sampling location. I'm going to zoom out. I had one more here. The disposal sites are going to have this green triangle here. So again, I zoomed in a little bit too far. But if I click on that, it tells me some more information about that. It's a dumpster where you can take your carcass after you're done processing it. And then when I'm done with this, again, these are layers I don't have turned on all the time because they kind of obscure, especially the positive counties. I'll turn that on. If I'm hunting in a state, which I commonly do, I hunt northern Minnesota every year. There is some CWD up there. I hunt in one of those zones that's yellow right now. So those yellow zones are where they have special restrictions. So that's going to be, I shot a deer in Minnesota this past year, and in our zone, it was a mandatory test the first 2 days of the season. Everybody that shot a deer the first 2 days of the season, which is the bulk of the harvest for the firearm season, we had to go into town. DNR had a line set up. They pulled some lymph nodes, sent it in for testing. I think it was like a week later, 10 days later. I got the results back, was not detected. So make sure you're going along with those regulations, getting things tested. Even if it's not mandatory, it's a good idea. Most states it's free. They want to know where these animals are popping up. And, if you're like me, I'd like to know if an animal I harvested has chronic wasting disease or not, just for peace of mind and things like that. The lights just turned off on me, our automatic timers in the office. I'll be right back. We'll start our Q&A session. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that, folks. I'm going to stop sharing here. See, we got some questions in here. Before I drop our questions, get to our questions, I do want to show our giveaway. As long as this works. So we're giving away some onX Hunt shirts today. These are our Whitetail XTs. Enter by midnight tonight. You can go to this link here. I am also going to post that, if it will let me, It's not going to let me. I have to stop sharing to get you that link so that I can post it in the chat. All right, here we go. So in the chat is the giveaway link. Enter by midnight tonight. I'll send an email out to all of the winners tomorrow, and we'll get your shirts mailed out to you as well. And then finally, if you do want to learn more about onX, if you want to go into other aspects of the app, our website and our YouTube channel are great resources for that. Our customer support team is fantastic. Their email is help@onxmaps.com. So if you have any questions, beyond what you can find on the website or YouTube or what we answer in these classes, they're fantastic. One more time, that's help@onxmaps.com. Then, of course, we're always doing more master classes. We do a monthly 101. So if this was a little bit too narrow of a topic for you tonight and you want to learn more of just the basics, we do those monthly. If you Google onX Hunt Masterclasses, our sign-up page should be the first one that pops up. You can go there and see our future schedule and sign up for any of the future classes you want to see. I should note, this class is being recorded, and so we will send an email to everybody with the link if you want to watch it again, or if you missed part of it or came late or something like that. All right, let's get into the Q&A. So Philip asked, purple haze on the maps. Phil maybe already answered that question for you, but that is the roadless areas layer. I need to stop sharing. There we go. Purple haze on the maps, that's the roadless areas layer. And that's a great question. If you ever do see something on your map, you're not sure what the color is, first thing to do is to try tapping on it or clicking on it. That often will tell you in that query card, hey, this is the CWD layer or the NWTF layer, something like that. Otherwise, go through the map layers and see what ones you have turned on and turn them off. But yep, that was the roadless areas. Let's see. Mark asked, what were the specific layers for tonight? So the ones we went over again were motorized roads and trails and roadless areas. Those were both in the roads, trails, and rec folder. The slope angle is in the land and access folder. And then the two CWD layers were in the current conditions folder. Chance asked, what determines roadless areas? How far would the nearest road be to be considered as roadless? That's typically going to be a half mile. So a half mile from the nearest road is what we considered roadless. Carl asked, can you change the color? You can't. Colors are set on our side. But if you do have recommendations for changes, we're all ears. You can again send those to help@onxmaps.com, and our customer support team will get those recommendations into the hands of the right folks. Let's see. Alan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asked, is this feature just for the US? I'm not sure exactly what feature you were asking about there. If you can clarify, and give me a little bit more information, I can answer that. Let's see. Is there a layer to find specific vegetation? Yes, Chance, there is. If you go into the trees, crops, and cover collection, we didn't jump into that today because we're going to do a future deep dive just on that collection or that folder. But the trees, crops, and cover will show you tree species in a given area. It'll show you the dominant species, whether that's oaks, pines, fir, and hemlock, aspen, you name it. We don't have it for like grasses. Unfortunately, I don't believe that data is collected anywhere to show you, hey, this is big blue stem, or this is, that's the one grass I kind of know. So that's my only example. But then we do also have the crop data. So we have 19 different crops that you can turn on, everything from corn and soybeans to lentils and rice and canola and fallow cropland, beets, things like that. So check out that folder, and later on this year, we haven't decided what month yet, but we're going to be doing one on the trees, crops, and cover. Are motorized roads always public? Are they normally not gated? So in that layer, if it's motorized roads and trails, those should all be public roads. Data sets on this aren't perfect. If you've been following along, I think it was a year or two ago, there was the MAP Land Act that was put through Congress and signed by the president, that the whole point of that was to digitize a lot of that road data, because quite often, the land management agencies didn't know what roads themselves were public or private. So that process is unfolding right now. More data has come online. So I won't say always. In my prior life, I was a teacher, and I used to tell my students, if you see a test question that says always or never, it should set off an alarm bell, because very rarely are there absolutes in the real world. Most of the time they're public. Quite often they are gated. Now, there are some roads where the gates never closed unless there's like a big washout or a fire or something. But that's why you have those open and close dates, to let you know when those gates are going to be open and closed. So good question there, Corbin. Let's see. Can you park at those roads that have closed gates? Yes, you typically can park, by that gate if you can drive up to it. Most of the ones that I've seen have a sign that say, do not block gate, in case somebody does need to get through. So don't block those gates with your vehicle. But I've quite often, you can oftentimes see where there's a little bit of a pull off where people have parked, or you got to go back 100 yards or something like that to find a place to park. But I do that quite often, and I'll just walk beyond that gate, and it's nice, easy walking. I do a lot of grouse hunting in western Montana that way. Let's see. Does onX have which states allow electric bikes and which do not? We don't have that data right now, Rich. Most of the time, it's going to come down to like a managing agency. So it's going to come down to Forest Service or BLM, if we're talking about like the big national agencies. On state lands, I got to admit, I'm not an expert on this. I don't own an e-bike, mostly because most of the areas I hunt, it's either motorized and I can get there in a larger vehicle, or it's non. And they are, rather new on the scene, some of those new e-bikes. So we don't have that data, Rich. I don't know that there is a great like data set where you can go and have a source of truth and say, yep, you can go here. No, you can't. They're still figuring that out, but we will try to get as much of that data as we can to provide you with the pertinent information. Let's see. Bobby asked, how come Montrose County and Delta County are not listed in the CWD Colorado? I'm guessing by your question, Bobby, that those counties do have chronic wasting disease in them. If I'm incorrect on that, let me know. If we don't have them listed on there, it must be because they're maybe a fairly recent, positive test there, or for whatever reason. But I'll do some checking with our folks. That data, again, comes to us. We worked with the NDA on that. So we might have to touch base with them and see if that needs to be updated. We do update that layer typically once a year. Unfortunately, it seems like every year, new counties, new states have positive tests showing up. So it could just be that we haven't updated yet for those counties. Let's see. Mark asks, so CWD positives and CWD zones may not match. Zones are more of a watch zone. Pretty astute there, Mark. You might have a CWD positive on that layer in one county, and then the zone might just be surrounding counties. That's fairly common, where it was found in one area, and then they want to monitor the surrounding area to see if it has spread out of that initial discovery site. Let's see. We are over a half hour here. I'll try to do a couple more here. Trying to find a lot of good questions in here, folks. I'm going to try to stick to the layers that we talked about today. Let's see. If motorized roads aren't shown on a national forest, then they don't exist, Bill asked. Not necessarily. There are a lot of those roads on national forest that are open to motorized use, but they're not included in the data set that the Forest Service provides to us. So typically those are going to be roads that may not be closed by the Forest Service, but they're also typically not as major of roads and may not be maintained. Like some of those old logging roads I talked about earlier, they're technically open, but they might have a 10-foot spruce tree in the middle of it, or they might have a washout or something like that. So they're open, right? But you can't really travel down them. I wish we had a great data set. I wish the Forest Service had every single road mapped out. They just don't. Hopefully in the future, we're able to get a more robust data source. But for right now, the purple roads on there, you can rest assured are motorized roads and trails, and that data is correct. The other ones, you might have to do some ground truthing on that. Let's see, when in CWD layer and there is no icon, does that mean there's not a sampling station in that area? It may mean that, Leah. It could also be not every state has sent us the GIS data for those sampling locations. States like Minnesota and Wisconsin have. A state like Montana, those sampling locations are typically going to be like a region office for FWP most commonly. They do have some other sampling stations in other areas, but they don't really provide us with that same data like other states do. So you may have to do some research, check with your state fish and game agency, whether they're, DNR or Fish, Wildlife, and Parks or whatever they're called in your state, to see where they have that. Typically, they're going to be listed in your regulations as well. Let's see. Joe asked, where can we find other onX webinars? Best thing to do is to just Google onX or whatever search engine you use, onX Hunt Masterclass. We should be the first one that pops up. You can also go to our website and find it there, and that will take you to the sign up page. We have all through February scheduled out with our future classes, and we're going to get March rolling later this week and early next week. So that's the short answer for how to find those. All right, we'll do a couple more here. Sue asked, where do we activate slope at? That is in the land and access folder. So that's where you go to turn that on. Let's see, a lot of these we've just covered. Motorized roads layer doesn't seem to be working in Canada. Good question, something I failed to mention. That is a US only layer at the moment. We're still building out our Canada data set. So if we're able to acquire that data, whether it's from a national source or a provincial or territorial source, we will try to get that in there. Good point there. I should have mentioned that earlier. It's just US right now for the motorized roads. All right, we're gonna do one more here. Great question here from Chance. Will my layer selections transfer to my phone from a laptop and desktop automatically? They will not. So any markups you make transfer between your phone and laptop, but layer selections do not. And so if you turn a layer on your phone, it doesn't automatically turn on your laptop. You do have to do that. I think that's a pretty good feature because a lot of these layers that I demoed today and some of the other ones that I use more for scouting, I don't want on my phone when I'm out in the field. So you do have to do them individually. All right, I am getting a warning that my battery is low on my laptop. So I am going to, one more time, post the giveaway link here. I want to thank everybody for joining us. You are going to get a survey after I shut down the Zoom. Please let us know what you think of these deep dives. They're brand new. This is our first one. Ways we can improve, what you liked, what you didn't, and especially future topics you want to learn more about. That's really going to help us decide the future of these deep dives and what topics we cover. One more time, enter that giveaway. We will send everybody a recording of this tomorrow. So if you want to go back and watch it, just be on the lookout for that. It'll happen tomorrow evening, 24 hours after the class. And hope to see everybody on the next one. Have a good night.